India has a more traditional society. So sometimes the burden is on the victims, on the woman to prove what has happened to them, and they're shamed a lot, even for airing their thoughts. And that's the difference between, I think, India, a traditional society, and a society in the Western countries. They are not shamed as much. People do give them the space to talk about it, and they're not blamed for what has happened. So yeah, that's the biggest difference. And I feel things are changing in India. Women are becoming more vocal, but there's still a lot to do, a big distance to cover.
Everyone, welcome back to Living the Next Chapter. I have an amazing author on the show. We both love the fall and the autumn and the leaves changing colors. We're both drinking coffee this morning, which is great. But my author today has done something I haven't done. She's written an amazing book. She's also working on a new project as well. Excited to have her here on the show. And Sreya's on the show with us. Sreya, welcome to Living the Next Chapter. I'm so glad to have you here. Welcome, welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the warm introduction. This is my first Canadian podcast, so I'm very excited. And I look forward to a wonderful discussion.
There you go. Well, welcome to Canada. It's great. Tell everybody where you are right now.
So I am in this town called Sudbury near Boston in Massachusetts. And it's beautiful outside, nice and sunny. And the leaves are changing color. So it's a treat to look outside right now.
Excellent. Well, we have our own version of Sudbury here in Canada. Here in Ontario, it's northern Ontario, where my sister lives. Mm-hmm. It's a long way from where I live. So there's two Sudburys, so we have that in common as well.
Nice.
There you go. That's great. Tell us where you're originally from, Sreya.
So I was born in India, but I have been in the US for the last 21 years. I was born in Calcutta. That's the eastern part of the country. I grew up there. I come from a family of readers. So, my love for reading and stories, it started early on. And I was a very fussy eater. So the only way my mom could, make me eat anything was when she told me stories. So I have a special bond, special connection with stories from an early age. But I've been here in the US for the past 21 years. And I'm a public policy analyst by training. I worked in several US think tanks for years. And my training in political science and my work has always made writing a priority in my life. I have written research papers, but I have handled a lot of data and numbers. But my work also took me to people and led me to have discussions about their lives. I was working as a policy advocate that included carrying out surveys. To give you a specific example, I was surveying a lot of people who used food bank services. And that exposed me to such fascinating personal stories. And I ended up using some of those stories when I presented the findings of the survey. And I saw the audience most animated when they heard those stories. And I realized, the power of storytelling and stories. Eventually, I made a shift from public policy to writing articles, social commentary, political articles in newspapers in the US and India. And that, again, took me back to people. I had to use their quotes for my articles. And they shared stuff which they wouldn't originally, start sharing. And they told me later on, don't include that story because it's too personal. And I realized that, it's only fiction, perhaps, where you can tell the truth.
Right.
So I turned to fiction to tell stories about people, fascinating tales that came to me and that I went to. So that's how I started writing fiction in my mid-30s. And it's been quite a journey from there.
Wow. Okay, so for someone who loves storytelling as much as you do, if we were able to pull together a group of young authors, new authors, early in their journey as an author, and you were able to sit down and talk to us about the power of storytelling, what would you talk about? What would you share as some key points for a young author so they could tell better stories? What would you tell us?
I think anyone aspiring to write, what comes first to my mind, and as to everyone else, they should read. They should read a lot. And not only those genres that they're comfortable in, but also those genres that they're not comfortable in. You know, a lot of people don't like reading sci-fi, but it can be like opening a Pandora's box with many new things. So I think exposing yourself to different kind of storytelling is important, and also learning, what you're passionate about. If you choose topics that is close to your heart, I feel you can write something original. You can have an original take. And also, I think reading is important for writers because that way you figure out what to write and what not to write and how not to write. I have had, my favorite writers are some that the kind of, style they use. I know I can't do it. I love Jhumpa Lahiri. I love a lot of Salman Rushdie, but I can't write like them. So knowing your limitation is also important and what you can focus on. So those are a few pointers I have for aspiring writers. Find your own voice.
Yeah. How important is it for you to know your audience as a writer?
I think I start with myself. I like to write what I like to read myself. Okay. Given my background as a policy analyst, as someone who follows news, contemporary topics are important to me. And one thing I realized about contemporary topics is that, the audience is so wide. There is no age group that it's limited to. Anyone who is interested in the news, in finding out what's happening around them, they become your audience. Mm-hmm. And I try to keep it that way. And what I've discovered is that sometimes you feel that your audience might be young readers or a certain demographic, structure you have in mind, bracket you have in mind, but your audience goes beyond that. So I'm learning a lot about it. But when I wrote my first debut novel, what I had in mind is young readers who like something racy, who don't have too much time, but they would have enough time to just dip their fingers and their interest in my book. So the young readers was my audience for this book.
We do have listeners that are listening to the podcast in India, and I know that India has many different languages and dialects, but I know that we do have listeners from your part of the world that would love to hear you welcome them to the podcast. Is that something you could do, is welcome our listeners in India to the show?
Sure. So all my friends and story lovers in India, welcome. I think this is a beautiful platform. I've heard other podcasts. They're so free-flowing and friendly and easy. So yeah, I'm so glad I got this platform. And I think you should hear these stories, these conversations, and come back here again and again.
Oh, great.
And for all my other friends in other continents, I think this is, I don't know, this is something which is so warm and friendly. It's universal. So let's just put it that way.
I like that. Okay, so let's jump into the recent book you have out there in the world now. I know you have a new project we can talk about later on, but talk about the process of writing this book. Tell us the name of the book as well, and let's kind of get the origin. Like, how did this book come to be?
Okay, so earlier this year in February, my debut novel was published by the Alcoff Publishers in India. It's called Beneath the Veneer. And it's been quite a journey since then. In a nutshell, it's a racy whodunit with some weighty class and gender struggle references. Let me tell you a bit about the book, and then I'll tell you the origin story as well. It is about how 6 women from different backgrounds end up in a new town called Rangvihar, situated near the bustling capital of India, New Delhi. The town has drawn new residents, promising them a posh, gated community with guards and proper check-ins. But beneath its luxurious veneer lurks an evil. The women discover the sinister side of the town as one of their teenage daughters goes missing. They soon realize that the disappearance is connected to a nefarious human trafficking racket. But the plot further thickens with more disappearances and the eventual death of suspects. As the layers of mystery peel off, all six find themselves embroiled in the crisis in unexpected ways. Pushed to seek a way out of it, they unearth secrets not only about the town, but about one another as well. So it is essentially a book on women camaraderie and friendship, how fiercely loyal and supportive they can be when one of their own is in danger. And coming from different backgrounds with unique traumas, they support each other when a crisis hits one of them. Now, let me tell you a bit about the origin of the book. It took me about 3 to 4 years to write it. And I finished writing the first and the second draft right before the pandemic hit. So if you ask me where it came from, so there are 6 different stories in the book, and they belong to the main characters. I weave this book and the 6 tales from the headlines coming out of India, whether it was female infanticide or human and sex trafficking, gender exploitation in virtually every field, especially sports, to abuse to known family members or friends. So there's a whole range of women-related issues in India that from time and again have hit the headlines and they get lost. People read them and they forget it because it's mainly numbers and data. But I thought if I weave them together in the form of a story, perhaps it will stick and they will remember it and try to do something about it.
Excellent.
So that's the origin story.
Excellent. Let's talk about the audience for the book. Who would you say would be your ideal reader for this book? We have listeners that are looking to buy a book for themselves, but also listeners that are looking to buy a book to give to someone. So identifying who this book would be for would really help us when we purchase the book. Who is it for?
So when I wrote this book, I had in mind the young audience, people who are looking for contemporary topics touching their lives. There are lots of historical writing, which are beautiful. But sometimes I feel that there is a gap, especially in Indian English literature. We celebrate a lot of history, but we don't talk about the issues, the plights, especially of women in our country right now. So I have the young readers in my mind as the main audience. And I'm very glad that I'm getting people to respond positively to this book. A lot of young readers have been picking it up. They have been reviewing the book. There are readers in India and in US who are really open to receiving the social messaging behind it, and I'm glad.
So let's talk a little bit about the fact that you live in 2 worlds. You have your Indian background and you have your American background. You have 2 different cultures that you live in and that you operate in. How is that an advantage for you as an author to pull from your background from India, pull from your background in the US? How does that make your writing better, easier? How does that help you?
The best realization I've had living in these 2 different continents, different countries, is that there are certain themes which are very universal. Women's safety, feeling safe is something which is on people's mind all the time, especially immigrants, because we carry this burden of always feeling unsafe from the society we came from. So I realized these universal threads. The other thing I realized is sometimes looking at the problems from outside, like physically also removed from the country that you're writing, that you're basing your book on, it helps. It gives you perspective. And there are so many things I learned staying in 2 different continents. Of course, there's this universal theme. And the other is that people understand human emotions everywhere. There can be nuances, there can be some traditional references that's new. But what is common is the feeling that people get when they read the stories. They're equally captivated, and that's what stayed with me and gave me the courage to write this book.
Is there anything that was difficult for you as an author? Again, being from 2 different cultures and your experiences as you kind of go from one culture back and forth. Anything that was a challenge for you as an author?
There were challenges, Dave. I mean, I have to admit, because when I was writing this, there were certain parts of the story which was so Indian that I had to think hard how much to explain. Because sometimes when when you're writing for an audience outside your country as well, you have to explain the nuances. But I did not delve too deep into that. I thought, everything can't be told. People have to find out for themselves. So let me just keep it simple and fast, and let me just stick to the characters and their arc. And that way, they might be more inquisitive and readers will find out for themselves. The other challenge that I had is when I started writing this particular book, I was not sure where it will be published, whether it's going to be published in India or here. My instinct told me maybe I should approach Indian publishers because they would understand the book. But that's the thing I've realized, that sometimes you should be more open. As an immigrant also, I'm learning every day to be more open to the culture in the US outside. And perhaps this time I will approach publishers here as well. So that's been a learning process for me.
Okay. So as somebody reads your book for the first time, they have a copy of your book in their lap. They're ready to open it. They haven't even read a word yet. Before they read anything, what's your message? What do you want to say to that brand new reader before they read your book? What's your message?
I would tell them that keep an open mind,
okay,
because this is a dark book. I'm a big fan of Gillian Flynn and Liane Moriarty. Both of them write about flawed characters. And I have also written a book which has a lot of people in it who are not perfect, who are very far from that. But I can assure the readers this much, that by the time they finish the book, they'll understand where these people come from, what was their state of mind, and why they did that. So I just want them to be patient and to read the book from the beginning to the end.
Excellent. What would you say is a flaw that could become somebody's superpower or strength? Because I think a lot of time as an author, we're afraid to share our message because we wonder if anyone will read our book or if anyone would care about what we write. So that would become maybe a flaw for us. It'd be an imposter feeling that no one would care. But you could turn that around. You can make that to be your strength instead of a weakness. How can we take our flaws and turn them into a strength?
One thing I'm still learning is that when you feel vulnerable, you feel weak. And the women that I talk about in this book, they're all vulnerable in their own ways. And they suffer and they struggle, and that's what makes them flawed and broken. But if you sit on it for a while, if you suffer enough, you always find your own voice. You find your own way of resolving it. Coming up with a solution is very important. You can keep complaining about what's happening in your life and how things are not fine, and then accepting it and having the grit to move on is something which can be turned around. And I think that's what this book is about. It's about human resilience and how all of them, with all their flaws and vulnerabilities, could turn it around.
Yeah. When did you find your voice as the author of Beneath the Veneer?
An incident occurred in 2012, 2013. There was a Nirbhaya gang rape case that happened in one of the Delhi buses. It was very unfortunate. It was in all the newspapers, and it was a very long drawn process. The girl died, and it was a very long drawn process of getting justice to her. It really rattled me, and after that, it stayed with me. And then again, after 2-3 years, another incident happened, and I saw these things, came to the forefront. People talked about it. There were, there were marches, there were protests, and it disappeared. And what stayed with me is, why is it that people are forgetting that how important and how basic women's safety is in India? And I thought I should write about it. I should collect stories, put them together, and experiment and see if I write it in the form of fiction, then perhaps it's going to stick with people. So that's one of the reasons I thought of writing this book. And my voice, it was difficult finding my voice here because I am speaking for 6 different women in this book. So I had to find 6 different voices. But once I started with the climax. That was the first thing that came to me. And then I started working on the world building and the characters, their backstories. But when I started doing the world building, the characters came to me and their voices came to me. So I tried to represent six different voices, diverse voices from my country. And having said that, of course, I have a separate voice as a writer as well. And I feel it's always changing. I keep seeing myself change every day when I keep every book is changing me, every writing is changing me. And I want to keep it that way. I don't want to become rigid about my style.
When you talk about women's safety in India and then as well in the U.S., do you see a big difference between the two different countries around the safety of women?
India has a more traditional society. So sometimes the burden is on the victims, on the women to prove what has happened to them. And they're shamed a lot, even for airing their thoughts. And that's the difference between, I think, India, a traditional society, and a society in the Western countries. They are not shamed as much. People do give them the space to talk about it, and they're not blamed for what has happened. That's the biggest difference. And I feel things are changing in India. Women are becoming more vocal, but there's still a lot to do, a big distance to cover.
So as a reader of your book, maybe someone who has experienced something where their safety has been challenged or compromised, is this book going to help them to kind of work through some of the things they feel as maybe someone who's experienced something to this degree?
One thing I will mention here, as I said at the very beginning, this book is based on women friendship. Yeah. In India, women, they talk, they share, but again, they are conditioned not to share their personal stories that much. I think once women become friends with each other, they form their own safety net. They support each other. That is a good place to start. Because if you don't feel safe even sharing what has happened to you, somebody has hurt you or somebody has belittled you, then, how can you begin your, fight for justice? So I think this book will help my readers open up a bit, discuss this with their friends, and find people, in their own tribe who have not had maybe similar experiences, but they've also been hurt. And this woman camaraderie is something which is the base for any kind of change in India, and I hope this happens.
Can you pick out one of your characters and give us a brief idea of a little bit of their story within the book?
Sure. Again, as I said, because I've pulled a lot from the headlines, there is one character. She's a woman athlete. She was a sprinter, and her story was taken. It's based on one of the sprinters from India called Duti Chand. This character's name is Rani. She is now wheelchair bound because she had an accident and she lost everything. She lost her legs, she lost her fame, her family. So this character she's very strong, of course, because she's an athlete. She is not only physically strong, but also mentally strong. And I think she is, you have to discover, once one reads this book, they understand how she is at the center of everything. And because, she has gone through a lot, she was hurt, she was challenged because of no fault of her, she was banned from the athlete community. She had to fight at every step, but it has not made her bitter. She, it could have turned her into this very bitter person, but she became more resilient, stronger, and she was there for her friends, even in her wheelchair. And it's a story of how she supports everyone silently in the background, but very strongly. So that's a character which is very important, and the surprise element of the story.
It's funny, when I talk to authors around fiction, you're creating this character based on a person or not, but you're creating the world around the character. And for the most part, you pretty well have everything mapped out. You kind of understand your character, But sometimes there's things you don't know about your character. So for that character in particular, you have the chance to sit down with her and ask her a single question that you don't know the answer to as the author. Is there a question you would ask that character that you're curious about that you just don't know what she might say?
I have questions like this for all the characters, because that's the other thing. I'm glad you asked me this, because that's the difference between writing fiction and nonfiction. I was in the habit of having everything figured out. I had the data, I had the numbers, facts. And I was so used to that. But when I started writing a full length, I realized how sometimes the characters, they decide what to do. And they also decide the twist in the plot. So the characters surprised me sometimes, and I could feel their rage. And there were mornings when, my family would ask me, what's going on with you? And I just I said, don't talk to me today. I'm not myself. I'm trying to, it's one thing to define them, and it's another thing to feel their feelings.
Right.
And there were dark days, and I would like to ask all my characters how they felt when it really happened to them, because at that time, you don't even know what you're feeling. So to feel that kind of pain that they endured, that's heartbreaking. It broke my heart like 6 times at least when I sat with them. I would ask them where they got their strength from, because I was struggling sometimes just trying to understand, be in their shoes,
Yeah. Out of all the characters in your book, which one did you struggle the most with writing their story?
There was this one character called Asha. She was initially this very meek, docile a housewife who had a flair for drama. She loved acting and, but she came from a very traditional background, and she was shamed for wanting that. She was called vain. And then she thought, when I get married, my life is going to change. So she got married to this, in this rich family in Delhi, which was very prosperous. And she thought her life would change, but it didn't. And her struggle with her husband started, and her husband was an abuser, but not a physical abuser. There was a lot of indignity she had to face. And every day she was broken apart in a new way. So it was difficult to go through, in my mind, what she might have. When everything looks fine from outside, but personally what's going on in the bedroom or in your house, and no one knows about it. So that was very difficult to write, but it was a challenge. And there were days when that weighed me down. But I'm very glad that I brought this character, because this happens and no one talks about it.
So this book came out recently, and that's exciting that it's out there for the world. You are working on new projects as well. Give us a little hint, a little insight to what you're working on currently.
Sure. So as I said, I like contemporary issues. Women's safety is universal. It is always going to be close to my heart. The other thing which is close to my heart is climate change. This is something, in the past, we heard it's going to come to us at some point. And right now it is here.
Yeah.
I can see cities sinking. I'm from Calcutta. Every year there are these cyclones, and a part of it is swallowed up by the sea. So it is happening. And the book that I'm writing on right now, it is like more, again, an experiment. I'm looking at 2050 Kolkata, which is submerged with water. And what happens, how society changes because of this new condition. Do people, they adapt to it, they become worse, everything falls apart. So again, I'm learning a lot of new things, because it is a new topic for me. I've read articles and I've seen news on what's happening around the world, how the world is shrinking, but it's another thing to write it as fiction. So it's been exciting, and I hope I can do some justice in bringing a new story together.
It's exciting to learn something new, dig into something different that you haven't done before. That's there's a big learning curve, right? As you learn all these things.
That's right.
Right. So that's exciting for you. You sound like you're a very curious person. You want to learn and know new things all the time. So this is perfect for you.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I get bored with writing just this same thing or the same genre. So I do a lot of, genre jumping, as I call it. And I like to, I'm a researcher at heart because of my background. I do like to find out new data, new information. So I try to include that in my writing as well.
Wow, it's exciting. I love hearing in new projects that authors are working on. You got to keep us in mind as the project becomes available in the future. Would love to have you come back and celebrate that as well. I know that the listeners love to hear from authors again and again as they do new projects, and they can follow your journey as a listener to the podcast. So keep me in mind. I'd love to have you come back in the future.
Thank you so much. I mean, I've been to Ottawa. I've been to Montreal.
There you go.
Yeah, beautiful cities. And I would want to go back at some point. And next time I go there, I will definitely give you a call and we should meet.
We should come to Niagara Falls and we'll take a look at the falls together. That would be wonderful.
That's a good idea. I love that.
There you go.
Thank you so much.
Talk about your website as well as we kind of head towards the ending here. I have your website up as we're chatting, but take us to your website and tell us a little bit about what we're going to find when we come to your site.
So I do have a separate website. It's very rudimentary, I have to say. I need someone to work on it. I don't understand the technical details, though, people, there is this image that people from India are techies. Not all of them, believe me. But yeah, I mean, I have the link to the book on my website. I have my other writings also there. So I have written many articles. I've written short stories, commentaries. I write poems as well from time to time. So you will find everything over there. And if you want to reach out, I have a email ID as well on the website. So feel free to reach out. I would love to collaborate with other writers and work on some new projects. So you're welcome to, contact me.
That's great. And beyond the website, where are you most active on social media?
So I'm on Facebook. I'm on Insta.
Okay.
I post regularly, and I have a lot of people. I've connected with a lot of people through social media. I'm also on Twitter. So if people want to reach out, those are 3 places. And I will give you all the details on how to reach me. So if readers are interested in having a chat, I would be glad to, do that.
And that's the beautiful thing about a podcast, hearing an author on a podcast and then them offering up the ability for us as a reader to talk to our favorite author and ask questions or have time with you. That's a beautiful thing because we see a book on a shelf in a store or on a website and we don't know the author. And that's the idea behind this podcast is I want people to connect with you and to have that relationship with you from a reader to an author. I think that bond is so important. So I'm so glad you made time to be on my show.
No, thank you for having me on this platform. I'm so glad we talked.
Excellent. We'll have links to all of your social media, to your website in the notes. But as we wrap up, one question to end off with. I'd like to know the name of my podcast is Living the Next Chapter. You talked about a new book that you're working on. But beyond that, how are you living your next chapter? What is coming up for you?
So, by now I'm a very curious person. I'm always trying to learn more from everything around me. That's why I'm asking the readers and people who are listening to the podcast to contact me. I would love to hear from you. My next chapter, well, there are always a lot of chapters simultaneously in my life. Right now, I'm looking forward to finishing the book I'm working on, the Cli-Fi book I'm working on. I'm also following some disturbing news from India. Lots of trouble happening in India, and the political scene is not very stable. Societies are still struggling with the Me Too movement in the film industry. So that's something I will always keep an eye on, and I will keep writing and keep going to the next chapter.
Excellent. Well, I love having you on the show. You're a fascinating person to talk to. I'm excited to see your great success for you in your books and your writing, all the things you have going on. Again, thank you so much for making time to be on Living the Next Chapter.
Thank you so much, Dave. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Excellent. All the information, as always, will be in the show notes, everyone. Please go check it out. And when you buy Shreya's book, make sure you leave an amazing review. let everybody know why this book is so important so that more people will support our amazing authors again. Thank you so much for being here. Hey, thanks for being here for the Living the Next Chapter podcast. So glad to have you as part of our family of listeners. There's a seat for you just here on Living the Next Chapter, and I'm so happy that you have listened to all the way to the end. Wow, you are now my new bestie. I want to let you know that I host 7 other podcasts on top of Living the Next Chapter. Yep, 8 total. One of them is called the How To Podcast series. If you are thinking, you know what, Dave, this podcast thing seems like a lot of fun. Well, I'll give you a secret. It is. It's a great, amazing, fun time where you can get to meet great people, get your word out there, promote your book, promote what your coaching program, whatever you're doing. Podcasting is great. And if you want to learn how to do this, what you're hearing right now, head over to howtopodcast.ca and look up the How to Podcast series on YouTube, whatever app you're listening on. You'll find me there. And I'd love for you to come listen to how to do this. And if you're interested and have questions on how to podcast, reach out to me at howtopodcast.ca. Thank you for listening. Talk soon.